This is how Europe can push back against China and Russia. This is an op-ed out of Bloomberg, and this is the West searching for some sort of way to compete against China and its One Belt, One Road initiative. China's rise on the global stage, but also Russia's reemergence as a global player. A huge infrastructure project by 12 Eastern EU states is an obvious geopolitical opportunity. It's called the 3Cs Initiative. It's a joint endeavor by 12 Eastern members of the European Union to update the physical and digital links between the Baltic, Adriatic, and Black Seas. That makes good sense in its own right, and I agree with that. It does make sense. Building infrastructure is the only way countries are going to move forward. That's what drives development. Good, modern, and constantly updated and maintained infrastructure. But here is where it starts to fall apart. But the kicker is that this undertaking may be Europe's best answer to the encroachments of Russia and China. And well, here's a map. And you can see the 3Cs, and you can see these nations, and you can see how, when strung together, they make practically a wall between Russia and the rest of Europe. And it even says here, an infrastructure initiative aims to contain Russia and China. I didn't know that Russia and China needed to be contained. If you look at a map of NATO and how it has constantly expanded eastward, and you think that the US in 2014 overthrew the government of Ukraine and how NATO is literally on Russia's border, it doesn't really seem like Russia or China are doing any encroaching at all. It seems like the West has always been moving eastward. And also think about, for China, there's US forces in South Korea and Japan to China's east, and US troops literally on China's border in Afghanistan. They're saying that Eastern Europe lacks in infrastructure. Travel by road and rail takes 2 to 4 times longer on average than in the rest of the EU. And they're saying what's missing is good highways, railway tracks, and gas pipes running north and south. And they're blaming this on the Soviet Union, which has not existed for decades now. They're saying the Soviet Union didn't care about north to south. They only cared about things moving east and west. But how long have all of these nations been roped into the European Union? So apparently the European Union also didn't care about developing infrastructure in Eastern Europe. So nice trying to blame it on the Soviet Union. That was decades ago. What about the decades these countries have been in the EU for? They're saying the 3Cs Initiative wants to change that. And now here's the real tell. Projects include, for example, a port in Croatia that could welcome ships carrying liquefied natural gas from the US, for example, and the pipelines that would bring this gas north to partner countries. Poland already has an LNG terminal. With Russia right there, with existing pipelines already sending cheap energy to the rest of Europe, there is no way ever that American liquid natural gas shipped across an entire ocean will ever be cheaper than Russian energy. It'll never happen. And the only way for American liquid natural gas to be a viable option is if there is no other alternative. If somehow they can just completely cut off Russia from sending energy into Europe, which is obviously the agenda here. So this isn't about improving anything for Europe, not for Eastern Europe, not even for Western Europe. This is all about just cutting Russia off, no matter what sort of damage it does to the rest of Europe, no matter what the consequences. And they even said here, the obvious boogeyman in the background is Russia, when in actuality, it's the US trying to sell more expensive energy to Europe just to spite Russia in this competition with Russia on the other side of an ocean. They complain about Russian pipelines going through Eastern Europe and how they claim Russia is using its role as a supplier to Europe to assert power over the countries through which it pipes its gas. But then the article is also complaining about Nord Stream 2, which circumvents Eastern Europe. And they're saying, well, now Eastern Europe complains that they might be circumvented, blackmailed, or cut off. So which is it? So again, you see how none of this makes sense. It only makes sense when you understand this is about the US maintaining primacy over Europe, no matter what the cost. Then they're talking about roads, railways, river ports, bridges, and more, and also 5G telecom networks. And they're claiming that China here is the bad guy because they're building all of this sort of infrastructure, including in Europe. And they want this to stop. And they don't care what the cost is to stop it. But their excuse is that China finances a port or bridge with rapacious terms intended to leave the borrower in a debt trap. Other times, the Chinese bluntly offer largesse in return for political support by the recipient country, which is something the West doesn't do. They don't offer you infrastructure in exchange for political support. They threaten you militarily or with political subversion. If you don't do what they tell you, they will overthrow your government, they will dismember your nation and leave it a smoldering pile of rubble, like what they did to Libya, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Afghanistan, actually parts of Ukraine as well. So as you can see, again, they're trying to make this as if it's strange for China to build infrastructure for a country and then expect friendship in return. And then the example they use is Hungary having this relationship with China and refusing to criticize Beijing for cracking down on what they call democracy in Hong Kong. But remember, that was US-funded subversion, which included extremely violent riots. And so no matter what reason Hungary had for not condemning that, they made the right decision because that was not democracy, that was political subversion and foreign interference, something the US complains about Russia and China doing, but something in reality that they do all over the world, including against Russia and China. And then finally, they say this is a good project to fight against Russian bullying and Chinese meddling. They're claiming Russia uses its exports of energy to coerce the region, and China has all these strings attached to their infrastructure projects. But then the last two paragraphs are all about the strings that they need to attach to this infrastructure drive that they want to start in Eastern Europe. It says, the EU should be clear about its expectations. All involved, including Hungary, must acknowledge the geopolitical subtext and unambiguously declare their allegiance to Brussels, foregoing alliances with Beijing. Second, the initiative mustn't become the germ of an Eastern Bloc that defines itself in opposition to the rest of the EU. And down here they say that if the 12 between the three seas endorse that idea, then all 27 can become a new bulwark of the wider West. So they accuse Russia and China of encroaching, but they're saying they want a wider West, which by implication means they're going to do the encroaching. So you can see how everything has been turned on its head in this op-ed, and this is at the crux of Western foreign policy, especially in Washington, London, and Brussels. This is all they do. They're doing what they're accusing Russia and China of. They're trying to block off constructive ties between East and West. And the alternative, as you can see with the liquid natural gas example, is not an improvement. It is not a better alternative. The West has no alternative for Russia and China. They have nothing. Their entire goal is not a multipolar world where everyone is doing business together. It is a unipolar world that they just maintain primacy over, and at any cost. And so it would be great if these infrastructure projects move forward. It would be tragic if the strings attached were Eastern Europe surrendering its sovereignty to Brussels, Washington, and London, and just becoming a front further eastward against Russia and China in this otherwise completely irrational confrontation between East and West. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share it. Think about subscribing. It's free to do and it helps the channel grow. Check the video description for the links discussed in this video. as well as for ways you can help support my work, like by becoming a Patreon member, where you can help support my work month to month, and you also get access to extra content. And to everyone who is helping me already, thank you so much. I could not do this without your support. And as always, thank you for watching.